Hello, hello, hello to you and everyone. Thank you again for coming on a Notch Higher Living YouTube channel. The space is created and the environment is cultivated where healthy relationship skills can be learned, developed, practiced so that they can ultimately thrive. And I have a beautiful, wonderful, spectacular, marvelous guest with me. Her name is Dr. Sarah Webb. Hi,
Hi,
Dr. Sarah.
Hi, nice to be here. I'm excited about this conversation. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Thank you for being here. I'm excited for you to be here. I was about to say, her name is Dr. Sarah, everyone. So if Dr. Sarah, you could tell us what you have your PhD in.
So my PhD is in English and writing, rhetoric, and culture specifically. And so I focused my dissertation on looking at the trajectory of colorism healing in literature for dark-skinned Black main characters and protagonists, dark-skinned Black girls in particular.
Wonderful. So you just gave me a segue into why we're here today. So for this channel, again, there is a passion that I have, and this is my life's work. That's what I have I've called, and I know it is, for healthy relationship skills to be developed. And this topic actually is pretty sensitive in nature because there are some that may minimize that it exists. At the same time, I definitely know it exists, and others, you yourself, you know it exists. So we wanted to discuss, and I wanted to discuss with you the topic of colorism healing. That's what your platform is all about, but specifically colorism. So Dr. Sarah, you've already said that this has been a part of your work, and obviously if you have a PhD around this topic, you have invested your life, time, and energy into that. That means it's important to you. So if you could define colorism so that people who may say, what is she talking about? So that they will know and be aware what we're talking about today. I'll let you set it up.
Yes. So colorism is a social hierarchy in which people who have the lightest skin tones are at the top of that social hierarchy, and people with the darkest skin tones are at the bottom of that hierarchy. And we have the range of human skin tones that falls along the spectrum in between. And so when I say a social hierarchy, I mean that there are privileges, greater value placed on lighter skin tones, and there are stigmas and discrimination and bias against people with darker skin tones. And when I talk about colorism, I also include things like facial features and hair textures.
Mm-hmm.
Those things now have their own terms, featureism and texturism. Although when I started colorism
Okay.
healing, we hadn't really been using terms like featureism and texturism yet, but I do also talk about colorism in an intersectional way. And so looking at the ways that even if someone has the same skin tone, if they have different hair textures or if they have different economic situations, right, their experiences might be somewhat different. I'll also say that colorism is global and cross-cultural. So
Mm-hmm.
my personal experience is the African American experience, but in my research and in my advocacy and teachings, I've talked about colorism and how it manifests around the globe in different cultures, races, and ethnicities. Yeah, I think that's the basic definition. And for people who are really, really new to the topic, it's important to realize that even if people are the same race or ethnicity, their
Yes.
skin tones can be very different from each other. And so that's why colorism is important to talk about.
I love it. And thank you very much for setting the tone and setting the definition that way, because I would like you to also explain how it came to be, because a lot of times people are just like, okay, that sounds like it makes sense, but how did how did colorism come into existence?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of humans, a lot of cultures for centuries have had hierarchies based on various forms of identity.
Mm-hmm.
So we see like a gender hierarchy, for example, in which in many cultures men have retained a disproportionate amount of the power and privilege and access to things. And so when it comes to colorism around the globe, we've seen communities, racial groups, or ethnic groups, or tribes, even even people of a certain caste or social class who
Yes.
have hoarded power and wealth and resources for themselves they tended to be lighter skinned people, right? So we look at Europe, for example, being a major player in colonialization, right, around the globe. And one feature of most Europeans is that they have lighter skin tones. They have
Sure.
straighter hair textures. They have thinner features and lighter colored eyes, for example. And so because those people who were colonizing the globe and again, fighting for resources, fighting to hoard power and wealth and status, were light skinned. We might call them
Mhm.
white skinned as well because they had certain physical appearances. It created an ideology that they were superior in every way. So
Got
we
it.
think about stereotypes about white people, for example, being more intelligent, but there are also
Mhm.
stereotypes of them being more beautiful. And so
Yes.
they spread that idea as a way to facilitate their ability to continue hoarding wealth and power and resources. And on the flip side, it was imperative that they teach the Native and indigenous people around the globe that they were somehow inferior because they didn't look like Europeans, right? And so it was twofold. They were teaching themselves and planting that ideology amongst themselves as European colonizers, but they also had to indoctrinate and brainwash indigenous peoples on various continents in order
Yeah.
to make them feel inferior. And so we have a legacy of that. And also, I mentioned this before, it wasn't just in word. Like they didn't just say these things, but it was through violence and
Mm.
the d- discrimination and the oppression, both psychologically, materially, right? Denying people access to
Right.
education, to food, to resources, to housing, physical violence, things like rape and murder and genocide, right? Where they were able to sort of break the spirits of the global majority, right? Black and brown people
Right.
around the globe to
Right.
then force that internalization of so-called white supremacy, right?
There you have it. And you linked it back to exactly. So that hierarchy is what pretty much the spectrum, like it
Mhm.
shows who is the haves and the have nots, so to speak.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let me see. So I am pausing because, as I shared with you before, I wanted to make sure that this topic is heard in a way that people understand that it exists. So I am a dark skinned woman and I've lived in the United States all of my life. And it wasn't until 2016 that I heard the term colorism. And her name is Dr. Lori Tharp. And what you just talked about, multiculturalism, multicultural, excuse me, and then globally, she talked about I forget the name of her book, but I'll have to bring it back up. But that was where I was just like, oh my gosh. I had never heard of the term, but I have definitely experienced what the term has meant to so many different people. So um can you explain to people the importance of having language around speaking about colorism? I'll ask a different question later, but just the language. For me, honestly, it was almost like, oh, that's what I've been experiencing. It's almost like I had the experiences, but it's almost like the implicit bias or anything microaggressions. You just, you kind of move past it, or you're pretty for it to be a brown skin or dark skin. Oh, like just so many of the things where when I first started hearing people say that, I'm like, I've heard that multiple times. It's like, you think it's a compliment, but is it a compliment? Or, just certain things where it's just like, I didn't realize too, like I know racism obviously exists, but the light versus dark, that really exists too. In my family, I'm the darkest of all my sisters, but we didn't engage each other like that. So it wasn't something that, how some people, unfortunately, in families, they have that hurt or pain. I don't have that. My older sister, I mean, we joke around now. She used to always just talk about me about just whatever, but I never had that where people, oh, you're too dark. Until I started getting older, where people talked about my skin tone. And it wasn't something that I talked about with my sisters or my family. I just felt
Mhm.
internally, I felt shame. So can you add, Can you give us the importance of having language around the term colorism or colorism, period?
Yes, because this is a particularly intriguing component of life in general for me in thinking again my PhD in English literature, right, and
Hmm.
studying language has
Yes.
been a significant part of my life, and it's why I do things like the writing contest. Because
Yes.
for me, language is uniquely powerful in terms of human symbolism and human tools, human existence. And what I believe and what I think has been proven to be true is that language shapes reality. And we
Mm.
develop a language in order to describe our reality. And actually, this might take a second, but I am going to try and search for a James Baldwin quote.
Take your time. Yes. This is very important.
Um, yeah, so James Baldwin wrote an essay in 1979 called If Black English Isn't a Language, Then Tell Me What Is. Um, and there's a line at the beginning where he says, "People evolve a language in order to describe and thus control their circumstances, or in order not to be submerged by a reality that they cannot articulate. And if they
Mm.
cannot articulate it, they are submerged." And I think, of course, it's James Baldwin, right?
For
Like
sure.
masterful in his use of language himself. But I think that encapsulates why it's so important to have language around these experiences that we now call colorism. When I first started blogging about colorism, I wasn't using the term colorism. I was using language to describe it like skin tone bias or skin color discrimination, right? So trying to get at the same thing, but I think colorism is uniquely useful because it makes it a system and a phenomenon in and of itself, right?
Sure.
Whereas if I just say skin tone bias, it kind of makes it incidental, or it makes
Hmm.
it seem like, oh, this is a matter of individual or isolated events.
Sure.
To be able to
Yes,
say it's an
exactly.
ism, then
Hmm.
we can look at systemic ramifications for it, right? And the cross-cultural patterns, right? If something that's
Mm.
an ism versus just an individual bias. And I've
Mm.
heard so many people like you, even like myself, say, you are helping me have language to something I experienced. I experienced this my whole life and I never knew what to call it. I
Right.
didn't know other people had shared experiences, right? And again, with the contest, people said, oh, I thought it was just me. I thought it was just in my culture. But suddenly, when we have language to talk about these experiences, we're able to uncover and reveal and unearth the breadth and the scope and the impact of what's actually happening.
Ma'am, that is so very true. And thank you for articulating it that specific way because just like you said, like I heard people say that they were ugly, and I was just like, and I looked at them like they're just because of their skin tone.
Mhm,
And for you to say that, it makes sense because it's almost like we're fighting an invisible wall
mhm,
because there's the caste system, so to speak. So it's specifically you're here, so this is what it makes you. And we don't have, I love how you put colorism healing. We don't have the language to start to heal if we don't have that framework. So
yeah.
I appreciate the way that you said that. And can you repeat the
And also,
James?
I'll just say,
Go ahead.
you can't solve or fix or heal or recover or recuperate from something that you can't name.
That's it.
And it's that simple as well. Yeah.
That's it.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask about the James Baldwin quote again,
Mhm.
or the
Yeah,
poem.
it was, so it's published in full in the NewYorkTimes.com. It's called If Black English Isn't a Language, Then Tell Me What Is. That's the title of the article. And it was published on July 29th, 1979.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. So, you are the founder of Colorism Healing. That is how I met you. I
Yeah.
saw your TED Talk. Again, I think I was doing more, um, not research, healing for myself. And I was like, okay, we're going to look into this a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. I'm like, who's this lady? I was like, colorism healing. What is this? So you told us your framework of why you went into your PhD, but why did you feel the need to found the colorism healing platform that you have? And then do you see in the work that you have put in, I know that it's like racism, or there are certain things that it's a lifelong journey. But
Right.
do you see
Yeah.
any movement as you've been um, advocating and giving language and opening up spaces for people
Mhm.
to conversate, and not simply conversate, connect, and
Mhm.
actually acknowledge that colorism is a thing? Like,
Mhm.
can you give us some insight around your practices and your work?
Yes, I like this question. It feels good in my spirit, like hearing you ask the
Yes.
question. Um, I started Well, I had experienced colorism my entire life, even before I have conscious memory, but I was
Mm,
silent about it. One, I didn't have language, but also even when I would try to describe my experiences, could sense that it was taboo. I could sense that people didn't want to really talk about it
yeah.
in certain spaces. When I was started to get a little older and went to college, certain spaces people would just say, "Oh, but you're just pretty. You just have to know you're pretty," right? And they would kind of dismiss it,
Yes.
well-meaning dismissal.
Mm-hmm.
Kinda how it
Like the
felt.
backhanded compliment.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it wasn't until I was teaching high school in my hometown, predominantly Black and brown high school, and I heard my students saying colorist things, that
Mm.
I woke up to the reality that, 1, this was not just my personal problem, and 2, that it was not just going to disappear into thin air if we didn't actively try to solve it, right? Because I was like, here's another generation of people saying the same things, having the same attitudes, right? I'm less proud of myself because I got too dark over the summer. I wish I looked light skinned
Sure.
like my mom. And
Sure.
all these comments that were coming out of their mouths as if they were telling me it looks like it's gonna rain today. I was like, it was as normalized in their minds.
Exactly. Yeah.
Colorism and these biases were as normalized in their minds as reporting on the weather. And so that woke me up to really see, this is bigger than me. And serendipitously, that was the same year when I was teaching high school. That was the same year that the Bill Duke Dark Girls documentary came out. And
Got
I saw
it.
a trailer for that. And I was like, okay, I feel like I can dip my toe into the water. I can overcome my fear
Okay.
of talking about this because I was afraid. And no one explicitly told me to not talk about it. No one explicitly made me afraid, but I gathered the vibe from the community, like, I better
Sure.
not talk about this. So
Mm-hmm.
I overcame that fear. I was like, okay, this is a prominent public conversation, the Dark Girls documentary. Ta-Nehisi Coates had published about it, which is how I found the trailer. So like,
Okay.
okay, I'm gonna share my story on this a little bit. And that was on a blog called SL Rights in 2011.
Okay.
And after doing stuff on SL Rights between 2011 and 2013, I was getting into the blogging community. I went to Blogging While Brown conferences. Shout out to Gina McCauley.
Nice.
Um, I realized that there was a gap between the incredible research done in academia, done by scholars and like textbooks and things like that on colorism, and the general public, like the average everyday 16-year-old or 19-year-old who might just be Googling or scrolling on social media and looking for her experience, right? Looking for a reflection of herself. And so also when you would Google colorism back then, right? Back in 2012, 2013, if you Google colorism, you would find a post here or there about something a rapper said or something a basketball player said, but there was no online, freely and openly accessible platform doing a deep dive on colorism, really talking about it with purpose and intention and with a critical lens, right? Like really getting beyond just celebrity gossip and saying,
Sure.
this is the real depth of what we're dealing with, and here are some strategies to start to free ourselves from it. That
Mm-hmm.
did not exist in 2012 or 2013. And so I was like, there needs to be a platform that takes this conversation seriously and that is where someone can go and get everything they need about colorism. So I created Colorism Healing in 2013. And
Mm-hmm.
over that time, one of the biggest changes I've seen is that more people are talking about it. I have
Okay.
to celebrate that. We still
For
have
sure.
who knows how long to go, but there is just like night and day in terms of the mainstream attention that colorism is getting in 2023 than it was a decade ago in 2013. And I have to say that 2023 is the 10-year anniversary of the Colorism Healing platform. And so like that sort of retrospective is really meaningful to me. And I celebrate the fact that there is increased awareness. And so my work, I survey people whenever I'm doing a presentation or just like in, giving talks or on engaging with people online. I
Mhm.
survey how many people have heard of it before. And there are always people who have not heard of colorism until that day, right? Like, this is my first time hearing of this. I had never heard about this until this event came up. And so part of my mission is to make sure that everyone who's heard of racism has also heard of colorism, right? And so that's part of my legacy, hopefully, going forward.
Yeah,
And I think that that alone makes a big difference, right?
it
Because then
does.
once we have that sort of critical mass of awareness, then I think we can finally start to see deeper and more lasting change.
Most definitely. Because it's almost what you said earlier. If you don't name something, how can you heal it? Or how can you address something that you don't acknowledge? So, one without the other, you can always have racism just going rampant. And there is a subset of racism, if you will. And it's just like, if we don't acknowledge that, like it's genderism, like even in the civil rights marches and
Mhm.
the movement, there were like the men were the
Yeah.
ones. There were
Yep.
women there too,
Hmm.
so um, I appreciate the way that you express that, because when you talked about the documentary, I remember listening and watching that. And then there were the young girls, because then Oprah had something too, but the young girls were talking about the light skinned girls and how they think they are better. And I remember watching it thinking like, no, it's not them against us. So what you just said makes so much sense. If we just take it as light and dark without understanding it's still attached to white supremacy and there that hierarchy, we never really get to fully heal or address the real issue, because people have hurts and they have scars, but then I'm going to fight you and you're going to fight me. And it's like, that's not what we're dealing with right now. It's like you said, it's bigger than us. It's almost a conspiracy. It is a conspiracy, and it really works, because the obvious is that I look darker than a lot of people. So someone lighter than me, there's the obvious spectrum. You know what I mean? So um you already mentioned this, but I would like to see how we can go deeper in it. So I want to see how we can frame this, because there are a lot of people, especially in the Black community. Like you said, this is a global, and this is bigger than just one culture or one race. However, I can only speak from the Black experience myself. Um, and I believe that there will be conversations of people who, or communities who are like, what are we doing? Let's move away from here. But I remember, what was it? It escapes me, but they had the paper bag test. And there were so many different um, errors where, yes, the lighter you were, the better off that you were, because one, passing, or you can assimilate into, and you looked a certain way and you were better than. But we don't talk about that in our communities and our families, how it's divided us and it's caused infighting. So I guess I want to, let me see, you already provided a context for addressing the issue. But if you want to say it and word it in a way where people can know that this isn't something, like you said, with your mission, it can't go away. I guess that's what I want to make sure I'm saying clearly. Colorism cannot go away in the sense of making it important. So I would like you to speak on the importance of how we need to look at it. And again, we're not going to address everything all in one setting, but I don't want the conversation to go where people are like, oh, that was interesting information, but there's division that happens within families, and I don't think people really recognize it. So can you speak on the importance of really truly addressing it? Like you said, if you didn't know that it existed, that's one thing, but to continue being unaware, shame on you.
So the biggest, I think, misunderstanding that keeps people trivializing it or dismissing it is that they think it is just disagreements within a family, and they don't realize that it is systemic inequality. And I think every issue that we point to racism, disparities, injustice, inequalities can also be explained through the lens of colorism. And this is a case that I probably don't have time to fully unpack in this interview, but
Mhm.
oftentimes things that we attribute to racism can better be explained because of colorism. And there was an article published in Forbes by someone that I know. The person who interviewed me for their Forbes article just published another article about a
Okay.
research study that came out that showed how skin tone determined the degree to which a woman experienced racism at work. So they have this bar graph with all the skin tones, and on the far left, they have light skin tones, and the bar graph is small. And then as you get further to the right, the darker the skin tones get, and the higher the instance of racism, or the
Mhm.
higher they report experiencing racism in the workplace. So what I tell people is, if we supposedly solve racism without solving colorism, the world will look exactly the same as it does now, where lighter skinned people,
Mm.
people with the lighter skin tones, people who look like Jennifer Lopez or Alyssa Milano, right? That the very pale skin tone, even though they can claim to be people of color, they still look white.
Right,
And so
right,
those
right,
people will continue to
right.
be at the top of the hierarchy, and people who look like myself and other brown skinned, darker skinned people will be at the bottom of the hierarchy still if we focus only on race without addressing colorism. And what people have to understand in terms of healing relationships between or amongst us as Black people or as other, ethnic and racial groups is that healing is impossible if one or both parties are denying the magnitude of the harm.
Yeah.
If you're gaslighting the person who's been victimized, if you're gaslighting the person who's experiencing discrimination, who's experiencing trauma and wounding, then healing is not possible. And so we have to be responsible, especially our lighter skinned siblings have to be responsible in acknowledging the problem and admitting to, accepting the
Yes.
fact that they are indeed privileged in this system. Despite
Wow.
other forms of oppression they may experience, they are privileged in the system of colorism specifically.
Mhm.
And it takes that level of honesty from people with the most privilege in order for us to move forward with our collective healing. Myself and others with dark skin, because I hear a lot of light skinned people say, oh, well, dark skinned Black women don't trust me, or they, treat me like I'm suspicious. And
Yeah.
I think the issue is that they act as if that's for no reason. There has been a legacy of
Yes.
discrimination, and we need you
Yes.
to be honest and account for that harm that has been done. You seem like you wanna chime in.
No, you hit the nail on the head of that's why we have to discuss. That's why we have to bring it forward because what you just said, that's what I experience when I listen to the young girls. It's like, it's almost like, okay, we both are dark skinned, but if I'm light skinned, you're, or vice versa, and we're just fighting against each other.
Mhm,
That's not, like you said, that's not the root of the issue at
mhm,
all. It's like so we're looking at each other, I'm fighting you and you're fighting me, or we're going against each other. And then the systematic structure is just like, okay, we're good. Let's keep going. Let's plant that somewhere else. Let's do that somewhere else. Let's
mhm,
do that
mhm,
somewhere else. Because it's like, again, when you talk about getting to the healing part, healing will never occur that way because I'm going to always see you as the enemy and you will always see me as the enemy. And you mentioned something with the trauma, because what we know about trauma because of racism, that's like one layer. And
Mm.
I will only say one just to make it general because it's deeper. So if colorism is another layer, and we know within each layer, there are multifaceted layers,
Exactly.
what you just said was like, that's it. And it's almost like when I heard the term colorism, it gave me,
Yes.
it's almost like credence to say, like, you're not crazy. Because I
Mhm.
didn't have these
Mhm.
conversations with anyone. I
Right.
didn't. Like, we don't talk about it. So if we're
So many
not talking
people.
about it and the silence is what's
Mhm.
causing me to think it's just me. And when I say it's just me, that's what keeps us unhealed and
Mhm.
unhealthy, because we're thinking. I remember I heard Oprah in the Hair Tales when she said it. She thought that she was ugly. And again, Oprah is not as dark as some, so I think that's the part that I really want people to hear too. I saw, we're talking about the African American community now, but I saw a woman who was Indian, and that's when I realized it was, again, outside of just one race and culture. She was beautiful, but again, dying ourselves, and I say dying ourselves, killing ourselves to be a lighter color is the norm for so many people because of what you're talking about. It's a hierarchy. It's not simply somebody's idea. I think that's what people think about racism. It's just somebody that was back then, or that's somebody's idea. No, it's an
Mhm.
institution. It's like institutionalized. It's a systemic structure,
Correct.
a system
Mhm.
meant to cause havoc on a group or
Mm.
groups of people.
Yeah.
That's totally different from me not liking you and you not liking
Exactly.
me.
Exactly.
Totally
Yes,
different.
ma'am. Mhm.
So it's almost like you don't get a chance to address the issue if we're not
Correct.
acknowledging it, right?
Yep.
So if it's
If
a
we're
system that needs to be dismantled and we're just changing the light bulbs.
Correct. Yes, that is so true. You're spot on.
Wow. And you said about trauma. I pulled out a book because I've been looking into trauma informed care. And one
Mhm.
thing that you mentioned, I think, even as I'm going through my colorism healing journey with you, um, my therapist, who has trauma informed care as a background, she
Mhm.
gave me more information so that I can have language so I'm understanding. And instead of it being what's wrong with you, trauma informed care is more focused on what happened to you. So I think I hear you saying that in the same thing as colorism healing, because if we're like, oh, dark skin, light skin, that's going to the what's wrong.
Mhm.
And then when we say what happened and what's our experience, that's a conversation I think that opens up curiosity, or it can open up curiosity because it's saying, you experienced what? Oh, you heard that too? Oh, that's a different conversation. And that gives us language to dialogue, as opposed to, I think so many people give just pronounced judgments
Yeah.
of, well, that's all in your head.
Or you're
Okay.
just jealous.
Yeah.
Or you're
That,
just jealous. You're just hating on me.
right. So we keep
Mhm.
putting a defense and like
Yeah.
separating us even more. So
Mhm.
let me see. I pause because I definitely want you to be able to, okay, yes, be able to share with people. There are people who may not be able to relate to colorism,
Mhm.
and there are people who may even need to learn. How can people who don't relate to it or need to learn more, how can they learn more about it? Like, even through your organization, what would you give people as steps to take now that they're listening to this
Mm.
conversation about colorism?
Yeah. So the clear and simple answer is to follow my work because that is the purpose of my work is to teach
Yes.
people about colorism, to deepen their understanding. And I always say there are other people in the world who have as much knowledge and understanding about colorism as I do, but most people in the world benefit and deepen and learn more. Because even people who feel like they are pretty comfortable in how much they know always learn even more when they engage with my content. And again, that's the purpose of it. So I want people to have access, whether you've just now hearing about colorism for the first time ever in your life, or whether you've been talking about it for a decade yourself, that colorismhealing.com or at Colorism Healing on social media is the place where we are learning about colorism, and not just learning about it in terms of the information and the facts and the statistics, but deepening your understanding of your role within that system, deepening your understanding of how you have been complicit, or how you have been part of the solution, or how you can be if you want to be, right? But then also, for people who can't relate to colorism at all, I think there's still a lot of room for empathy. And I often
Mm.
role model for myself my own privileges. A very one that very clearly aligns or is an analogy to what I see with colorism is sizeism. And so we talk about lighter skinned people being privileged under the system of colorism. I, as a skinny person, have definitely benefited from being skinny my entire life. And that is a
Mhm.
form of privilege that I can see very clearly that my siblings in larger bodies or marginalized body types
Mhm.
experience levels of disdain, stigma, and oppression and discrimination that I never have had to face. And
Yes.
yet I still empathize, and I still um, can, in my care and concern and understanding that a more just society for everyone is a more just society for everyone. And so I definitely encourage people not to just be singularly focused on the ways that they are oppressed, but to also realize that if we want true anti-oppression, true liberation for everyone, then we have to care about everyone's experiences.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. I
Mm,
remember hearing you talk about that. I believe you said that in your TED Talk, didn't you? Talked
mm.
about size?
I don't remember, but I do talk about it pretty
I,
often.
I, okay, I was going to say, I've seen you talk a couple of, yes.
Mhm.
So I think that is where, either way, that description and that scenario and synopsis is very helpful because it's like you said, you can have empathy for those that you are not um, the same as. And I
Right.
think that is really what's helpful for people because sometimes we want to just bring the focus back on us. And I do want to enter into the conversation the reason why this is such an important topic for me, because this really, again, in 2016, it exposed something internal in me that needed to be healed. And I didn't have language, that I didn't have words, and it's not just simply about me, which I am important all by myself.
Yes,
You,
you are.
yes, yes, thank you. But to also hear that other people, they live this world and we don't have to live it alone. And it doesn't have to be something that's, like you said, isolated or just um, a scenario that we have to try to figure out. Um, and what I don't want it to be for people who are like, oh, people just want sympathy. It's not a sympathy. I want to be seen. I want you to be seen. I want people to be seen as their full self. And if I have in the back of my head, you have in the back of your head, it's the implicit bias. Like literally, I took that test. I get it. And the test that I'm referring to is like they show pictures really quickly, and like you select. And I did the race implicit bias, and they show the dark photos, or they show the light skin photos, or like just the colors, and they attribute it bad and good to certain the tones. And my first implicit bias test, like I was very definitely veered to the white hue, because it was just like, it's what you said, it's ingrained inside of me that black is bad and white is good, or it had been. So I
Right.
think you bring the conversation to this um, level unearths what has been planted. And I
Mhm.
believe your work is so important, and I'm grateful. I am a part of Dr. Sarah's Colorism Healing group. I was trying to think, I know I connected with you in the summer of 2022 because
Mhm.
I knew I was finishing some things out, but I think it was either September or October of last year where I began. And what I have gained from sitting in that space, and the space is virtual, having the conversation and having the connection with other um, women, and they're all women in the group, like-minded, and having scenarios that are similar but unique to us, is that I'm finding a voice for healing, so that this is not something that I attribute to someone's opinion. It's not an opinion. It's not um it's not an idea, it's an ideology that must be, dissected and disseminated and desecrated. But along with what you're doing in your work, the healing factor, um, I believe too, for so many brown skin, dark skin men and women all over, they need to have this space to be able to breathe.
Mm.
Because when you can breathe, you can live, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't know until I found out, until I didn't know what I didn't know, that like, wait a minute, I'm not living here because I'm kind of pulling myself out of the conversations because I don't feel a certain way. So I'm not sure. And it's funny because I'm like, okay, we want this work to be great and grow. It's like, I'm not sure. I know I had to go through a process. So if someone is interested in becoming a part of your group, how does that work? Are you taking people in, or like, what is your process if people were interested in becoming part of the Colorism Healing group?
The process is pretty simple. It's not super intensive, but you would email me at info@colorismhealing.com,
Okay.
and you would simply express your interest in the support group. And what I require is a very brief 15-minute introductory meeting,
Yes.
so that we can discuss and make sure it's the right fit, to make sure it aligns with your goals and your needs. And it is open to dark people who identify as dark-skinned Black women, right? And so that is inclusive of transgender women, women from the LGBTQIA plus community as well,
Mhm.
but definitely dark skinned Black women. I considered other formats, but I know misogynoir and being a dark skinned woman globally means something different when you're a dark skinned Black woman. And so the space is exclusively for that. And I think maybe as we grow, we can expand to
Okay.
maybe more multicultural groups again. But that's the process in a nutshell.
Thank you. And I want to honor that you have it for Black women because, again, giving myself the opportunity to grow and to heal, now I can step into that fully flat footed because I can say, I'm not trying to heal everybody right now. Done that so long, so many times. So for us to be able to say, well, because we can hear with our hair, like other people have problems with their curly hair. This is not you, okay? This is not that. Let's do this now, okay?
Right.
So to be able to bring it back in a helpful and healthy way, I believe that's what you've provided, that space for people. And I want to honor that. And the reason why, again, I have Dr. Sarah on, and I have you on, Dr. Sarah, is because the healthy space that I talk about creating for the YouTube channel, again, I believe this is my life's work, and we have so many different layers. So it's not simply,
Mm.
oh, if you fix this or heal this or address this, then X, Y, or Z will be taken care of. We're multifaceted, and we're worth the time, and we're worth the space, we're worth the effort and the attention of disseminating or pulling back those layers.
Mhm.
And your work for Colorism Healing, it is a testament to the beautiful, the work, and the person that you are, because the person who you are is more important than the work that you do, and that is what it speaks to the work that you do. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Yay, yay, yay. So I'm gonna allow you to speak to your to the viewers, and for you just to share something about colorism healing and what you would like people to know and to walk away from this interview.
Yeah. 2023 seems to be there's this organic theme emerging for me, and it's Black History Month when we're doing this interview. And there's a tendency to, again, just dismiss and trivialize colorism as being a distraction from the quote unquote more important issue of racism. And so my biggest campaign at the moment is for people to understand that colorism is just as important as racism. And even further than that, we cannot solve racism if we're not doing it in tandem with solving colorism. And I really want to drive that point home because there are so many people who care about anti-racist work, anti-racism work that's in racism,
Yes,
that's in white supremacy. And I tell them colorism is white supremacy. So if you came to claim to care about ending white supremacy, you must care about ending colorism as well. Like you can't
yes.
solve those issues that people seem to prioritize without the issue of colorism being right along with that.
Bless your soul. That's beautiful. And I forgot to share, for all of my brown skin, every tone, yes, but I'm specifically saying because we know that there is an issue. I am beautiful. I want you to say that to yourself. For people who have brown skin, dark skin women, we're saying specifically women, we're women. You can say it to anybody that is a man or woman. So there you have it. But we're specifically, I think sometimes we try to include everyone all the time where we exclude those who really need specific. So I'm talking because as a brown skin, dark skin, yes, I'm saying to you, you're beautiful. I've had to learn, I still have to say it, I'm beautiful, because again, the stigmas, the institution, it wants to say something completely different. So I want you to know that you are beautiful. This is not some, Pollyanna approach to, it's like, we know that deeply rooted and entrenched thought process, we have to speak to it. So I want you to know that you are beautiful. I am beautiful. So I'm saying it to you as I say it to me. And as we continue to create this space, thank you, Dr. Sarah, let's be okay with normalizing our worthiness and normalizing the colorism healing that we need to have. I want to thank Dr. Sarah so much for coming. You are a blessing in your body size and who you are.
Yes, thank you, Jasmine. And I would like to show appreciation for you too, because we need as many people who look like us doing this kind of work. Because I think that representation is so important in our communities. Black women, having a darker skinned Black woman, talking about wellness, talking about worthiness, talking about self-care, and like all the facets of what you talk about is so important for people to see, like, okay, here's an example of what it looks like to love myself, to care for myself, to deem myself worthy, and to have conversations with people about that aspect of life, which is so important. So
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So until next time, I want to put a bow on this one because all that has been said is necessary for now. And like you said, we may have conversations later. But again, for everyone who watches this channel, I really want you to know that the work that is being done here isn't work that it's just because I don't have anything to do. Just like Dr. Sarah, she has a heart and a passion, and she's put in her time. That's what I want to give to you as well. So I would like you to give yourself the space and the grace to do the work, not work on yourself, do the worthy work of knowing fully that you are a prized possession as a fully grown human being, even if you're younger, a human being. That's number one. Like, be beautifully you, wonderfully you, handsomely you, whatever you want to say, but be you fully. So until next time.